Now we'll move on. William Minchin, I suppose first maybe just a few words about yourself and your relationship to Nuffield, and maybe a response to those two presentations that you've just heard.
Okay, thanks, Ger. I'm on, yeah. Congratulations to the two presenters. I suppose in preparation for today, we had a quick call, and Ger introduced me to the two ladies as an expert, and I can assure you I'm far from an expert. So I asked him how I qualified, and he said, well, you're signing a cheque. And I'm sure that certainly helps. But it did make me think wider of, I suppose, the Nuffield Conference and my relationship with it. And it goes back to, I believe, December 2010. Forgive me on the years now, but December 2010, I met a well-known scholar, Bill O'Keefe, down in a garage in Fermoy. And Bill asked me to, as part of my marketing role in Pfizer, to support the conference coming to Ireland. And we gladly did so, and we got approval and so on. And funny enough, after 4 years, I moved on to MSD Animal Health, and the sponsorship of the conference came with me to that. And it's great to see MSD are still sponsoring the conference. And obviously, now in my role as the Agricultural Trust and the Farmers Journal, the conference seems to follow me around, or I'm following it, I'm not sure. But I have a very strong affinity with the Nuffield Conference. And obviously, you know, Matt Dempsey was mentioned earlier, who's, I suppose, a strong affinity with the conference, and certainly brought Nuffield to Ireland, and had a very strong role in that. And now Jack, the editor of the Farmers Journal, and I as CEO, and Liam Wolfe, the now chairman of the Agricultural Trust, are big supporters of the Nuffield Conference. And the question is why? And I suppose when you think of the Nuffield Conference, you know, it's about change, and the title today is Shaping the Future of Irish Agriculture. It's about impact, and what impact can the conference have on shaping the future. It's about disruptive thinking and networking. And as a young, I suppose in my late 20s and early 30s, I loved coming to the Nuffield Conference. And I know there's younger people starting out in their careers today. I see Donald Murphy, a guy who I work with in MSD. Really, you were rubbing shoulders with the likes of, obviously, Matt Dempsey, Pádraig Walsh, rest in peace, and Jim McCarthy, who was out in Romania with visiting his farm and has some great things in Irish agriculture. Campbell Tweed and many, many more. Tim O'Leary, I see as well. And really, they probably underestimate the impact it has, the opportunity to mix and network at this conference. But what I love about the conference when you're here is it doesn't matter what age you are or where you are in your career, your opinion is just as important. And I actually feel that maybe those that are further down their career or in their later years, more experienced, they're open to the opinions and a new way forward and disruptive thinking, which is unique about this conference, in my opinion. So I just said I'd give a little bit of background there. That's why I have very strong affinity. I'm not a Nuffield Scholar, so I'm not at all qualified. I'm not in HR either. And maybe to move on to the presentations today, I suppose people is an interesting one for me. I hate the word labour. Personally, I think we should use people and skill sets. People are the most important asset of any business, yet they're the most complex and arguably the most difficult to manage. Sometimes you can do everything right and still people leave you, and you can take that very personal as a manager. I think in the presentation, Gillian touched on a number of things, and the last one really struck with me was reward. And I've used a few, and all the managers in this room will say, you know, you use a certain few skills throughout your career. And I think back to a presentation, if you haven't seen it, a lot of you will. Daniel Pink talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So if you're relatively well paid for what you do, and believe me, none of us in this room believe we're well enough paid for what we do. But if you park remuneration, autonomy is the opportunity to express yourself as an individual. It's about having ownership over your career and getting on with what you do best. Mastery is about further education. It's not necessarily about further education, but getting better and honing your skill sets and learning. And then purpose, and that's being, I suppose, feeling you're involved in something in a greater good, something bigger than you. Google do it quite well, you know, Apple, the big pharmaceutical companies. But when we think back to farmers, they're also feeding the world sustainably. And it's important not to forget that just because somebody is milking the cows, you need to deliver that message to your members of staff, even if it's one or two people, that take the time out to make them feel part of the business is really, really important. So yeah, I suppose I've worked for two companies, one retain and attract the best talent and hire to retire, and they were the two taglines, and they're really tied in with your presentation, Gillian. I suppose the big challenge here is you've got a lot of farmers in the room here today, and they have 1 and 2 employees. How did they get around on your travels? Where did you find that farmers were overcoming, the relative small numbers, but making them feel part of the business?
Yeah, thanks, William. Yeah, I think that's a challenge in Ireland and across the world. And sometimes you see in a family farm business, a lot of conversations happen around the breakfast table before anybody has even left and gone out into the farmyard. And I think it's important to say, well, if you do have somebody that's working on farm, hold on a second, let's make this a little bit more formal. We don't need to necessarily be all suited and booted having the conversation, but it's ensuring everybody's involved. And it's about, I think we underestimate the value of communication and the clarity around communication. I think that's what's really important. It's not just telling somebody what task to do every day. It's what are we trying to do? Where are we trying to get to with that task? So I think that's what's really important. It's making them feel part of the family in those 1 or 2 employee pieces or businesses. It's making them feel part of the greater good. And again, it's understanding what motivates them. Why are they there? It comes back to a little bit about what you're talking about with Daniel Pink as well. What are they passionate about? Why have they decided to come and work on your farm? And lean into that, because that will, help to keep them engaged every day.
And I suppose back to the remuneration piece, is there, like, pharmaceutical and IT and finance companies in Ireland, probably driving our economy in truth in a lot of cases, they're using LTIs, so long-term incentive plans. They're using share purchase schemes to, I suppose, give even a relatively small part of the business back to the employees. Is there any examples on your travels that farmers can learn from that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think there's lots of good examples, probably here in the room and in Ireland, of that happening as well. A great example is in Tasmania, and some people here will be familiar with Richard Gunningham, who's a scholar over there. Richard is English originally, but moved over to Tasmania to start farming. And what Richard has done is he's grown his business hugely over there, from a very small operation to now having numerous farms that he manages. But he's brought in different people to manage them in that shared partnership. But what he has realised is the role of farmer is very little part of his day-to-day. He's a people manager. And what he has done is identified the needs of, again, those different people that are working with him on farms. And the 2 examples that I remember discussing with them at the time, one was a young couple looking to buy their first house. So he was working with them in terms of how do we get there? Who are the right people you need to meet in the local area? Who's going to some of the bank manager meetings with them because they didn't feel confident in that. And that was what motivated them, and that's how we supported them in their journey. Another example was of an older couple that had a number of children who were in school, and he gave them a bonus in September, whenever you're going back to school in Australia, in terms of buying the school books, buying the uniforms, because again, that was what was important to them. So it's really about, I think, that individual piece particularly when there's smaller numbers working on farms as well.
Very good. I suppose before we move on to diversification, geez, I've lost my train of thought now. Maybe we move on to...
Don't make it a hard one now.
Yeah. Diversification, I suppose, when I was thinking, the challenge I'd have for the Nuffield conference is, and I've said it actually in a lot of workshops after the lunch, I've been coming for 14 years, whatever it has been, 13, is it 13 or 14 year in Ireland? And we're going to hear 6 great presentations today. But the challenge is, and Lance Woods won the Pádraig Walsh Award last year. How do we pick one and say, so what? What are we going to do about this? And with diversification, I feel that you've put up some great recommendations here. Policy is probably the big one, and a unified approach. Like, the fear here is we walk out of this room now this evening and get tucked into the weekend, and we don't do anything about your findings. How do we overcome that? How do we really make a tangible change based on your presentation?
I think, first of all, you'd have to, liaise with Teagasc perhaps, you know what I mean, but probably get the players in the room, the actual, you know, so for example, if dairy people were having a crisis in their industry, I'm sure they all talk to one another and then they go to their co-op and then that gets further drilled down and they discuss the price of whatever, you know, they want, whatever their issue they're trying to overcome. So it should be no different. It's just that they know who the players on the team are and I don't know who the players are. I vaguely know who my competitors or who I might aspire to, but I don't necessarily know the players. So you have to compile the players, have a database of them, and then, because that's not existent currently. So once you get the players in the room, and then try and drive that forward, and then get Fáilte Ireland and the other people, because you know, to develop a product, you need to know who you're actually going to drive it forward. Does that make sense? So I would suspect that Caroline Miller in Scotland, that's what they did. They literally just sat down and said, right, who are all the players? We've now got X percentage, we want to grow to Y percentage, and we want to, and then they had to do their economics assessment. So that's, because you've no voice if you can't value your industry. And currently we can't value our industry.
Yeah, I spoke to Barry Caslen last night in preparation from Teagasc, and you know he's one man, one person. Yeah. Now we did mention there was others with that responsibility as well, but like Barry was saying, you know, this leader has a responsibility of one part, and Leo and then Teagasc kind of focus on food. And obviously more parts involved in that, and then Attenroy and different components. I suppose I still go back to the same question. So who is this going to sit with? How do you move it on?
That's my whole point. It's not going to sit with any one person. It has to be a joined-up, collaborative approach. It simply can't be it can't be shelved out to the Department of Ag, the Department of Tourism. It has to be a new way of thinking. So for example, in Croatia, where 90% of the rural population, there was no tourist product. They, you know, civil war for 4 years in the early 90s, and they literally nothing. They just had no product. And what they actually did was they put the Department of Ag, the Department of Tourism in the same office, sitting at the same desk. So they got to know each other. So they weren't on different teams. They were on the same team moving forward. I'm not suggesting that's going to happen in Ireland, but what I'm saying is that's the kind of open dialogue and communication that needs to happen in order to drive it forward. And that's a big ask, you know, because like it's politically sensitive. And everybody has their areas that they want to cozy up to. But that, to me, is what needs to happen, is you need, you know, the Teagasc, the leader. And then what Barry's referring to is that there's the lack of, you know, synergy between all those players, so that, you know, each one is working individually. The county councils, they all have different areas of what they want. And it's also leaning towards, if somebody's on a board, leading to what their personal preference or what they might feel comfortable with, but having no feel for where food tourism should go. So, you know, and you lean to Fáilte Ireland and those guys, because they have the expertise in marketing, they have the expertise and the knowledge. I mean, if they can do for the Wild Atlantic Way what we can do as farmers for food, then we're on a winner, you know? But that's what needs to happen.
There was a fundamental thing that was going through my head when I was sitting down listening. I remember in the 1980s going around in a Volkswagen Golf, in the back of a Volkswagen Golf, a family of 6, we covered every inch of Ireland. And today, our first thought is to go to Spain or go out of Ireland. And I was in a local hotel, you know, down in Loughlin Bridge, and we over the weekend we got 2 coffees and a dessert, and it cost €18. And I said to myself, I recall, and I'm not old, but you know, it's not that long ago you'd get 2 lunches for very close to that. And is it a fundamental issue that the cost of doing business, and then the cost that you have to charge the customer in Ireland, we're killing agritourism, and there's actually very little future for agritourism?
Well, I don't believe that we're killing agritourism, because we don't have a voice currently, so we don't even have it listed in any policy document. We don't actually even use the definition agritourism, so we can't kill something that isn't physically sitting there as a presence, other than what rural development is and Barry is. And what he does is he's producing an options program, which is quite dated and old school at this stage now. It's been around for a long time. And what they do is they say, and I'm digressing and I will come back to where you're at, but what they do is they say you can diversify into glamping, you can diversify into, say, beetroot juice, and whatever's sexy at that time. But it's not desperately visionary, you know? So the price point issue I can't address, because that's the whole energy thing, that's the sustainability thing, that's the labor thing. I can't address that, but I'm not, personally, I believe we're in the, you know, as on the edge of Europe, that we're in the business of value and creating value and memorable experiences. That's what people want, and people are going to pay for those memorable experiences. So I don't want to be all things to everybody. I want us to be niche. I want us to excel and to do something really, really well. And then we can get over that price point issue.
And I think we're very lucky in Ireland. This is my last comment now, before we go to maybe to the floor, but we're very lucky. I was in a prison in Perth. Now, I wasn't actually in the prison, it was a tourism. But I was visiting my brother over there, and no, he wasn't either. So just I should clarify that. It's Fremantle Prison, but it's a tourism attraction.
Yeah.
So there was 50 of us anyway in a big group, and they were bringing us around the prison, and I think we paid, I can't remember what we paid, but a significant amount of money. And the tour guide said, you know, this prison is over 160 years old. And I turned to my wife and I said, you know, I can't believe we paid this to come here. I have gates at home in the field that are over 160 years, or certainly over 100 years old. So, like, I think maybe we undersell what we have here. Yeah. But I still go back to it, the costs of doing business here, and for someone in agri-tourism to make a margin and what they have to charge the customer. I think we're pricing ourselves out, and it's cheaper to go to Spain where there's sun, sea and sand. You go for a breakfast for €30, the family of 5. It's a huge challenge.
You know, we're back to Tom's discussion with regard to local. You know, if we want to really fix sustainability, we have to live in that atmosphere of localhood all the time. So if you want local food, you know, excellent cuisine, you want sustainable, you're going to pay for that because there's a cost in growing that, and we have to change people's, you know, to embrace, like, so that we don't have avocados, et cetera, et cetera. I'm really on that vein. I'm in that slow tourism kind of picture. And, you know, I can't, you know, if you want, you know, going to Spain is mass tourism. I'm not in mass tourism. I'm in niche tourism, and I want everybody in Ireland to be in niche tourism. We're an island nation on the edge of Europe. I'm also not desperately, you know, we only have 2 million domestic visitors, where we have 6 million international visitors. So sure, we're going to get domestic players, but most of our people come from overseas. Climate change is going to happen. People are in countries where it's too warm and they want to leave America, and I know that from my experience right now. So they want to come to me because it's a more temperate climate. We have an opportunity. Okay, it may cause problems and we have a little bit of rain, but they actually love that, you know? So we just have loads of opportunities. And to answer your question, I'm not in the mass tourism game. I don't want to go to Spain, and that's it.
Fair enough.
Sorry.
Fair, that's very clear. Before we go to the audience, just 2 quick questions for me. Gillian first, and maybe just your thoughts on one of the things I see as a farmer, and labour, people, I shouldn't mention that word labour, but is the seasonality here. You know, it's become more intense in the spring, particularly on dairy farms. The horticulture sector we were talking about earlier, particularly outdoors, this time of the year, not easy harvesting, carrots, spuds, all that kind of thing. You know, difficult, great, we've had a great 6 or 8 weeks, whatever it was, but normally it's very, very difficult. Have you seen anything in your travels that you would advise employers or farmers in terms of how to deal with these peaks in demand and then maybe lulls subsequently?
Yeah, thanks, Ger. No, and look, I think that's always going to be a challenge, right? I think in some countries what you see is that where work is seasonal, they look for work that complements each other. So whether it's you're in a meat factory for 6 months and then the other 6 months you're out and you're picking fruit on a horticulture farm. So I think it's around thinking about the employee long term. How can we support them and having something to full-time work for 12 months of the year? That's where I think that conversation needs to go to. And I think, you know, we talk about retention. It doesn't necessarily mean that we need to retain somebody to work on our own farm for 10, 15, 20 years. It's retaining them in the sector. And maybe they come back and work on your farm, you know, year after year, and that's great. But long term, how are we retaining them to go and work in a dairy sector, you know, and take on a farm on their own in the future? So I think it comes back to that piece around communication, understanding what motivates the employee, what do they want, but how can we support them in finding roles? And it can also be in local areas in Ireland. It might be that you only have work for someone 2 or 3 days a week. Is there a farmer down the road that has work for them the other 2 days? Again, sometimes I think we overcomplicate things. Bringing it back to simplicity and how can we support that employee to get what they need from it as well?
Very good, very good. And Margaret, a question to you. And I noticed in your figures like 2 million domestic tourists, 6 million from overseas. And the current debate at the moment is Dublin Airport and the cap on Dublin Airport. And I've already seen, I was trying to book something for January, a weekend, and there was a rider on with the travel group saying that we may have to fly from Belfast Airport. It's a charter thing, you know, and that was there, and you know, no responsibility if we have to bus you up to Dublin Airport because the cap in whatever happens may affect the travel. That's only 2 months away. And I was just thinking, you know, Dublin Airport's absolutely critical to rural tourism and those 6 million visitors, and we need to get them out of Dublin. That's maybe a problem as well. But have you any thoughts on, that's a serious policy issue now, and you've referred strongly to policy where nothing's happening by the looks of things. Have you any thoughts on it?
Less so on that, but more on Fáilte Ireland have just released a new policy framework. It only literally came out last Wednesday, and it's leaning really heavily on sustainability, and that they want us to reduce our greenhouse gases by 50% by 2030. And that to me is a big ask, which will push up the price that you refer to. You know, so they haven't actually set how they're going to manage that and the metrics of that, other than what their ambitions are for that. They haven't drilled down yet. So it's an issue. Yeah, I won't deny that.
Okay, I'm going to go to the audience now and for questions. Just keep your questions as brief as possible. Use the time as best possible. Just give us, before you ask the question, your name and organisation, if you're with an organisation, and fire ahead. So a question here at the front.
Yes, hello. Una Sinnott is my name, UCD and Chagas. So brilliant presentations, thanks very much, so interesting. I have a question for each of you. So perhaps Leah first. I'm just thinking about how years ago, farm life in Ireland, farmers were very dependent and they needed their neighbours, and there was a lot of cooperation needed to get a big job done, like harvesting and things. Whereas nowadays, farmers are very independent and, you know, they have a lot of the equipment in-house. So less of this cooperation between neighbours is happening. I'm just wondering, did you come across that as a team when you travelled? And perhaps has that journey towards independence of farmers and the lack of, you know, neighbourhood cooperation, has that been positive or negative maybe for the agricultural industry? And then Margaret, I'm just thinking about all these opportunities, you know, that we have in Ireland. And I'm thinking about beyond the trees in Avondale and Centre Parks in Longford, and the fact that, okay, they're not eco-tourism, but perhaps fall into the realm of eco-tourism, maybe not agri-tourism. But one is highly funded, you know, by a German company, and Centre Parks is owned by a Canadian company. If we don't jump on these opportunities that Ireland has in terms of agri-tourism, do you predict that a foreign direct investment is going to jump on it if we don't? Thank you.
Okay, maybe Gillian first there, please.
Thanks, Una. Yeah, to be honest, I probably didn't see that many examples around the team piece in the local area, but I think what we sometimes forget about when the team piece is the family team, and we see so much of that in Ireland where there's so many family members working on farms, and we don't see them as employees, we just see them as family members. And you know, meeting with Paul Harris in the UK, he talked about when you go in and talk to a farmer in the UK, those, you know, people numbers in dairy farms, they have their employees marked down, how many hours they're doing, how they're contributing to the P&L on the farm. In Ireland, we don't do that as much. So I think there's a big piece, you know, more so that we need to recognise the importance of people within the family working. If they're not there, what do we do? And that's what we see, I think, as we move towards those conversations on succession. And that's a lot of why I'm here today as well, in that we don't realise how much, you know, whether it's somebody doing the books, whether it's somebody covering, you know, milking, whether it's somebody out helping lambing, those family members, if they weren't there, would the farm still be as economically sustainable? So I think that that's where that narrative and that conversation needs to happen a little bit more in terms of, are these farms still as economically sustainable with one farmer? But actually, is that one farmer got 2 or 3 people working in the background? So actually, what does the talent pipeline look like in the future?
John, if I can just come in very briefly, and I suppose that's when Una's touched on when I had my brain fog, I suppose the role of technology and AI, and it's brilliant because our reliance on skilled staff is going to reduce, but the reality is going to increase loneliness and isolation at farm level, which is a scary thought. Obviously, technology is brilliant because you know automatic calf feeders. You've got behavioural monitors, so collars for cows. You have robots milking cows. You know, there's so much technology out there and available, which is filling a gap. So we went from 1.1 million dairy cows to 1.6, 1.5 million dairy cows now. So there was 4,000 extra people needed to manage those cows, but they weren't there. So that's fast-tracked the adoption of technology at farm level. However, that creates a void in terms of isolation and loneliness at farm level, which is a huge risk. So less exposure to people. So.
Yeah.
Okay, William, Margaret, in response to Una's question there on farm
Hi,
investment.
Yeah, so I suppose the hat that I'm wearing is the third of Irish farms that are not viable currently unless they've enough farm income. So they're the group that I'm trying to appeal to. But to answer your specific question with regard to investment, and also because I'm very particular about the need to define agritourism, so that agritourism is not in fact ecotourism, even though you can experience ecotourism and nature tourism. So that's why we need a very definite definition, and that definition, in my opinion, has to be on a working farm, and therefore you can set the barriers as to where we want to go and what the vision can be. The investment piece can happen, and probably will happen, because there's this need to be in nature, because of the mega urban cities, and you know that trend for everybody living in urbanization. So will it, you know, it's happening everywhere else all over the world because they have the power to invest, to create super, you know, facilities. Just Transition, that fund that's coming in and has been monitored by, you know, managed by Fáilte Ireland, they'll probably do something in you know, the Midlands area that will bring something to the fore in that space. But yeah, it is a threat. Sorry, best I can do.
Thanks, Margaret. Question down at the back there, please.
Gillian, first of all...
just your name there, just for the benefit of everyone. And
Jim Dwyer.
I know you, but...
married to a long-term Nuffield Scholars, you know. Gillian, very good presentation and well thought through in the way you put your points about people. And, you know, I love the who, the where, and the how. But just a question for you. How did you decide on the 4 priority elements for farmers to focus on when creating what you call your STAR framework? Maybe if you just explain that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Yeah, look, I am somebody that loves processes and simplicity, and anyone that knows me in the room knows that I think sometimes we overcomplicate things, and sometimes I think the challenge for farmers is that they're scared of the people piece, and they find it daunting, and they don't know what are the next steps to take. So it was kind of around taking all of my experience from my travels and breaking it down into something simple, and it was finding maybe to be a little bit cringy. I think people are the stars on the farm, so that's where the star came from. And when you look at each of the elements, it's around that suitability piece. Sometimes if we don't know what it is that we're looking for, we can't attract the right people. So it's really important to be able to write that down on a piece of paper and create a clear job description. Employees have so many different opportunities out there at the moment. You want to have the key words in there, the key skill sets that you're looking for to attract the right people in. The trust thing is really important, and it can be very challenging, particularly when you go back to those farms where you have 1 and 2 employees and you're not used to having people, and micromanagement can seep in. So it's really important from day one, when you give somebody a task, to trust them to do it. They're more than likely not going to do it in the same way that you've done it for 10 or 20 years, but they'll have a different angle of doing it. So it's really important to have the trust. The achievement piece, again, you know, recognizing when somebody is doing something well is important. We all like that feeling, and I think it really allows people to feel empowered. People are going to come up with different processes, different ways of doing things, and they're going to hopefully help the overall economic sustainability of the farm, and it's really important to recognise that achievement. And finally, we've touched a little bit on the reward piece, and William talked about it in different ways as well. It is so important, and you know, that will change and evolve for people as they move through the lifetime of working on your farm as well. What might motivate them when they start working with you will change, you know, in 5, 10, 15 years of working with somebody. So it's important to kind of have that continuous conversation. Just because, you know, giving them an extra couple of hundred or euros or extra X percent every year in their salary worked for so many years, it doesn't mean that that's going to keep working. And maybe as things change, as they have families, as they have aging parents, as things change, it's really important to be adaptable and to change that reward based on those needs.
Thanks, Gillian. Just a question up here at the front, Tim.
Tim O'Leary, I'm an older Nuffield Scholar as well. One of the things I learned is I should ask the question sooner rather than later, because half what I was going to say has been answered already. But I think I brought 2 sons into the business with me milking cows. And one of the things I learned very early on and transferred it now to staff as well is that I should shut up. Yeah, I have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and I should use those proportionately. And listening to people is far more productive than talking at people. And it's a thing that we don't do enough of. Just a couple of comments rather than questions, really, and maybe you can disagree or agree with me. But one of the things I've noticed about how we can hold and retain staff and get staff is the reputation of the farmer and the locality. Because people now, when they're going looking for a job, they're going to ask locally, what's he like to work for or what's she like to work for? And if you have a good reputation, you have no problem. And if you have a bad reputation, you have a serious problem. And I know of some dairy farmers that have to pay twice the rate for a relief milker because of their reputation for not paying. Like you find yourself in that position and you're banjaxed, you know. The other one that's really suited me a bit is that, and 'tis the one about retaining staff in a seasonal system like we've got in dairying in Ireland in particular. And maybe something that people don't think of is that 'tis I stepped back in the slack period, not the employee. So there was plenty of work for the employee to go on. I had free time to go do other things or look at other stuff that I wanted to do. And, you know, it's just a bit of alternative thinking rather than saying, well, I have to get up in the morning, I have to milk the bloody cows and everything has to be done my way. You know, just to step back yourself and leave the space there for the employee to fill it in. They feel more fulfilled and I have more time in my hands. And pay well and pay on time and all that sort of stuff. It's the same point. And the point Gillian was making, or no, it was William was making about the, we went from mechanisation, we've gone into automation, and that has really lifted capacity on farms to do jobs more effectively and efficiently. And I think we underestimate sometimes the value of that value of automation and the collars, the feeders, and we have entities like the ICBF who have made things so much easier on the breeding side, for example, that you don't have to do the work. It'll be done for you once you tell them what you want done, you know. Okay. So I think that a lot of those issues, maybe you don't agree, but I think a lot of those issues are things that we have to pay more attention to.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, no, good points, Tim, and agree with them there. Like, I think just to touch on the reputation piece, I think you're right, that is so important. And, you know, I touched on it a little bit there in that social media, that how you communicate your online brand is so important, because we're not only attracting people from down the road where it's word of mouth, but we're also attracting people from overseas as well. You know, and I think that's really important. So if you have 2 farmers that are portraying themselves online to potential employees, one has newer machinery, you can see some other employees, images of them laughing, having a good time, maybe doing something socially, whereas another one is portraying maybe a dirtier yard and maybe an older tractor that's doing the work. Which one is the employee going to go for? So I think we underestimate sometimes, you know, that piece around reputation locally is important, but again, on the bigger scale when we're bringing people in from overseas as well. So yeah, there's lots, we could talk about all the points you made there, but yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
Okay, Gillian. Question down here at the back.
Yeah. Hi, Neil Keane, FRS Co-op. Congratulations both. Question for both. Gillian, it was interesting to hear how you articulated that common ground between generational renewal and people management and attracting people. There's a generational renewal working group now. From your travels, what would be your top recommendation to that group going forward? And then separately to Margaret, I think, you know, agri-tourism, I appreciate it's difficult to find, but definitely seems to be an appetite there for us, whether it's farm shops or Jeremy Clarkson or you know, whatever that looks like. But is there a way of defining what the market opportunity is, you know, if we're going to try and attract finance houses in, or, you know, banks or whatever that might look like?
Okay. I'll go to Margaret first there, give Gillian a break for a second.
Yeah, well, the main market drivers at the moment are authenticity localhood. So that's like your local seasonal produce, etc. They're the two key drivers. And then the fact that people have a higher disposable income, and that they want to self-gratification, they want to spoil themselves. That's essentially it, you know what I mean? That they have more time and that they're disconnected from their food and where it comes from. So you as a farmer, or any farmer, has that opportunity to meet that need. Because A, you live in nature, B, you're connected to your food. You know, so you can satisfy all their needs. And if they're the critical market drivers, and also there's investment internationally, across the board, every other country is pushing forward with regard to agritourism and seeing that's where the greatest growth is and the greatest opportunity. And what I'm saying is I think Ireland is missing a beat and needs to get on that band. And that's so, I think it's very possible. But where do you start? Are you asking me, do we need a toolkit? Yes, we need a toolkit. Yes, we need to know who the players are. Yes, we need peer-to-peer, training opportunities to go and see really good, people, doing it overseas, like to the places I've been to in Tuscany. I'll give an example where I went to a butcher in a very small town, but he had a street wagon further down the road. Then he had his premium cuts in a restaurant. So he had his little butcher shop, which was tiny, like really tiny, like this size. He had all his merch on the other side. His restaurant was above him, and that was where his premium cuts were. Across the road, he had his lower grade cuts, and he had the same menu going for at least 15, 20 years in both places. Same menu, every night, that's it. But when you walk further down the street, he had 3 people answering the phone all the time, and he was playing opera in his butchers. It was phenomenal. And he was a mastermind. I loved him. But it was really, really simple. But what he was doing really well and providing really good food. But it was the experience of having that food in his restaurant. And that's what I keep saying. It's memorable experience is what people want.
Neil, look, I think when you talk about generational renewal, it's what is generational renewal? It can cover a lot of different things. I think maybe just to touch on the succession piece for a second, when you go to the likes of New Zealand and Australia, they're talking about succession when, young people are coming up through the farm and they're in their 20s and their 30s. I was shocked when I saw some farmers who were in their 50s and they'd already gone through that succession journey. Here, you're in your 60s and you're starting to talk about it, and it's nearly a bit of a dirty word sometimes at home in some family farms, and I think we need to talk about that, and we need to get better about talking about that earlier. I think when you're looking at different generations, there's different things that drive different generations. When you look at the millennials, the Gen Zs are coming into the workforce now, we've Generation Alpha coming up. They are all driven by different things. I'm in the middle of a recruitment drive in my own role at the moment. When you look at the Gen Zs, they're very driven very much so by the importance of values, the importance of team is really important. So I think there's lots of different things for us to consider, but I think it's the most important thing that we have to be open-minded to is embracing change. And sometimes, within agriculture, that's not what we're the best at. We're the best at it maybe in mechanization and automation, but sometimes in how we have to change our own ways of working, we're not the best at doing that. So I think it's embracing change and taking examples from where that has worked well is really important.
Question down there? Any more questions put your hand up. Speak now or forever keep your silence. Yeah, down here. Far ahead.
Just a question for Margaret. With all the restaurants closing down here in Ireland, especially if you're in a rural area, are you going to maybe have to start doing the meals for the visitors you have on the farm in order to provide that local food? Because otherwise, where are we going? It's terrible. All these restaurants closing. Thank you.
So your question is that the restaurants are closing down because my client doesn't have a place to go to, is what you're saying, essentially for dinner? No?
I'm saying the restaurants are closing down.
Yeah.
Will you have to now make the meals for your people who want to eat local food?
Yeah, I already grow the food for my guests that come to me personally, so I do grow the food, which I give to them. But I also I think there's an opportunity for me. I already do a farm to fork supper, an annual farm to fork supper, so people can come on farm, enjoy that food, and they have that experience, which is quite sought after. But there's an opportunity for me then to bring that further and to cook the dinner. But it's to cook those meals, but to charge them for me to sit with them. So for example, in Croatia, they're very clever. So that if it's olive oil, right? So you can go to the shop and you can buy an olive oil, and they'll do the tasting and they'll give you all of that experience. But then if you want to sit with the man who and then you can go and have a tour of the orchard of the olive trees and have that. And that's so there's a price point of like, nothing to have the free experience of the tasting. Then there's the go and do the orchard tour. And then there's, by the way, you can stay and have dinner later and learn more about the olive oil and the tasting and the cooking and all that process. And that's the premium end. And that's where I want to go to. So yes, I'm happy to cook the dinner, provided it's a premium. Does that answer?
Okay, thank you, Margaret. Question down here at the back.
Hi, Ailbhe Gerard, Nuffield Scholar 2016. Great presentations, thank you. I'm really interested in the intersection of the values that one of the speakers was talking about, the new generations and values. And I wanted to link that with what Margaret said about the number of vulnerable farms in Ireland from the point of view of income. And surely agritourism is one of those areas that we should all be looking at for two reasons. One, with our environmental, biodiversity and climate crisis, that agritourism can help reduce the pressure on our environment and water quality by reducing the requirement for small farms to possibly overproduce for the hectares that they have. And the other side is to attract people in, which is one of the other big issues, is that there are labour problems on Irish farms because it's not seen as an attractive thing to work in. I just wanted, maybe Margaret, you could speak to that. Thank you.
Okay, Margaret.
Okay, how do I, so do you mind awfully just recapping that again? Do you mind?
Very briefly now.
Yeah,
We're running up on lunchtime.
Agritourism has got great potential in helping with Irish farms' social licence by linking people back to food production and reducing the pressure that overproductivity has had on our water quality and on our environment generally and our climate, and would also help with the attracting people to work in rural areas. The thing is that agritourism will bring money and to the rural areas. You know what I mean? So currently everybody in their job centres, they're all urban centric essentially. So agritourism facilitates the Department of Ag and pushing people towards diversification without necessarily giving them the toolkit as to how to do it. But yeah, certainly it ticks the box for them because we can reduce, as you say, the agricultural output, we can produce the money, the income. So yeah, it does fit, it will address that need. With regard to the labour, still a challenge. There's no point in saying it isn't. I have my own challenges with regard to labour, and that's probably because it's embryonic currently, and I don't have enough throughput and traction all the time because I don't have cows that have to be milked every day, let's say. But as the business grows and develops, there should be. And again, it's with the sectors putting in the training. It's again with all those collaborative efforts and having clusters of people doing really good stuff, then it can grow.
William, just want to make a quick comment?
Just a quick comment to that. I think this is obvious for everybody. I don't think it is for everybody. We need to be very careful. And talking to Barry Caslin of Teagasc last night, as mentioned, there's social consequences of taking on agritourism. You're married to it. It's every day. You can't really go travel. It's consequences for the wider family. It's not for everybody. So I think there needs to be a qualification through the whole process. Like we've 17,000 dairy farmers. If they're all to turn around in the morning and get stuck in and making cheese and milk, have they a market? So you just need to be, I think, as you say, we need policy, but we need steps in place and support mechanisms to make sure farmers are making the right decisions and the right, because they might be better off concentrating on the core business that's on farm and making, finding efficiencies there and improving the profitability of their core business. So I would have a concern that just the comment was, isn't this obvious for everybody? I don't think it is. I think it's a percentage.
Not everybody in Ireland wants to be a dairy farmer. Some people want to be beef and sheep farmers.
But same for beef.
So everything, we can't be all things to all people. No. But the people that choose to go into agritourism, I don't feel I'm married to agritourism. I run my agritourism business on a seasonal basis. So I do my spring calving, then I do my agritourism, then I go into food. So I very clearly set the parameters of what I want to do. And I think anybody else is in a position to do that as well. Sure, I would have probably less labour shortages if I was running 52 weeks of the year. But it works for me, A, because we have a climate that, you know, and as well as that, farms don't look quite so pretty in winter. They look a bit poached and a bit, you know, not quite as sexy. So, you know, it's really that simple.
Okay, just a point I'd make as well, just listening to the conversation there as well on the whole diversification agenda for rural Ireland. I think we just need to be careful. You know, we have a great agricultural product, be it our dairy or beef or hort, albeit needing a leg up from this morning, and the cereal sector and all the rest. And I wouldn't like to see a policy debate getting into agritourism or any other diversification replacing agriculture. This is about, you know, building up rural Ireland. Okay, ag has to be done more sustainably, and we have to meet the challenges for the future and in measurable and results-based way. But I'm always careful of a debate that goes into, you know, I see that. Yeah, no, I'm just making the point. I see it as our base, our agricultural production, and our ability to do what we do as being something a bedrock, and we need to build around that, and that's on farm, as per what some of Gillian has said today, and indeed exactly what you're doing, Margaret. So that's just a comment on this.
Yeah, but if you want to take that, sorry, you know, I know you want to finish up, but like if you want to take that as a challenge, that, and you've been talking to Barry Caslin, I mean, the diversification hat that Teagasc is wearing in rural development is bioenergy.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, and sorry, is that not taking agriculture out of the picture?
Same
you
question.
Know, agritourism is by no means doing that. I'm saying it needs to be on a working farm. It needs to be real farmers. It needs to be an experience, and we can charge a premium for that, and we can go really far, and we can do it really well. There's nothing sexy about a solar farm and agritourism. You know, there's no question. It meets the sustainability needs. Yeah. Sorry.
I don't know how we're on time, but it's time to close down. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience. But most of all, I just want to say thanks to Margaret and to Gillian. The toughest part of a Nuffield Scholarship is making that, as a returning scholar, making that presentation, getting over the line, dealing with the questions, and you both carried it off eloquently, and well done.
Thank you.